New Religion is a Japanese horror film that's recently been picked up for its wider Western release, courtesy of bloody disgusting Screambox platform, and I think of all the films that you'll find there, it's by far one of the most interesting. It is written and directed by KEISHI Kondo, and this is his first ever feature film, which I think is really impressive, because it's a very intensely visual and atmospheric kind of psychological journey, where we're following our lead character Miyabi, who we learn as the film progresses has had something really terrible happen to her young daughter in the past, that has led to her now becoming withdrawn and kind of emotionally distant. We see that Miyabi is now working as a call girl, and in an early scene that kind of kickstarts the main action, one of her colleagues, Akari, who we're first introduced to as being a self-harmer, suddenly snaps and seemingly without any warning goes on a killing spree. Miyabi is then later contacted by a very strange and singular client, a guy that seems to have a moth obsession, who exists in this permanently red-hued little apartment, and who speaks through this voice box thing, with this booming, unhuman kind of distorted voice coming through speakers that the guy's got dotted all around his apartment. But the Mothman doesn't just want to sleep with Miyabi though. Instead, he wants to take photographs of her, very specific photos of certain parts of her anatomy. Miyabi then discovers that the Mothman was in fact the last client that Akari, the woman who went on the killing spree, had visited before she suddenly snapped. Could there in fact be some kind of a connection between those two events? And so begins a very personal and very terrifying journey for Miyabi, as she finds her sense of self being slowly eroded, as she has to come to terms with what she is willing to do in order to be at peace with herself, and the profound loss that she's suffered that is eating away at her. And the real question is the Mothman a threat to Miyabi, or does he in some strange way represent her last hope for some kind of salvation? So, from this already fascinatingly ambiguous and kind of ominous title, New Religion opens with a really incredible kind of surreal progression of images that really kind of set the tone for the film going on, and it introduces you to some of the film's kind of key visuals and ideas, almost in a kind of subliminal way, in that you don't entirely know what any of these images represents at first. A lot of the things that you'll see in this opening sequence are things that are going to have more meaning to you when you know where this film's actually going, what kind of territory it's playing with, rather than this just being some kind of surrealist mood piece for its own sake. You'll also get a sense of the tone musically, in that there's this kind of wonderful, rumbling, ominously kind of hypnotic industrial synth score playing that really gets under your skin and really kind of sets the hairs on your neck standing up.
So the longer the note, the more dread.
New Religion's got this amazingly deep and kind of resonant score that almost is there to hypnotise you into entering into this kind of melancholy transcendental state, like you're being tuned into the particular frequencies that this film operates on. So just the opening itself, that opening kind of first 5 minutes before any of the action really begins, does a lot of really promising things. It's an opening that says, okay, you're going to be strapping yourself in for a very unique filmic experience. You're in the hands of a director with a very arresting and powerful visual sensibility. Somebody that's setting out to take you to someplace very special and very unique. Now, I will say before I go any further, I'm not going to be spoiling anything here in terms of plot details, so don't worry on that front. But what I will say is that it's a film that doesn't necessarily rely too heavily on actual plot mechanics as such. It's much more of a kind of ambient psychological experience that's got some really kind of profound and disturbing ideas and concepts along the way that are weaved together in this kind of strange, dreamlike way. There's certain images that take on great symbolic significance, such as the imagery of the moth and the cocoon, that are resonant without being belaboured in a kind of trite film studies kind of way. In a way, we're never really allowed to feel safe or certain, or like we're beginning to understand the world that we're in, as dreams and reality intertwine, and you get some kind of genuinely disturbing moments of surrealist terror along the way. Mainly, though, we're led by our desire to see Miyabi grow emotionally as a character over the course of the film. But what's interesting is how rapidly New Religion outgrows the idea that we as an audience are in a world where what we want or what we expect for our lead character has any bearing on the actual reality of this particular world. How we really are in a parallel existence where any kind of conventional linear character development or working out of ideas or themes seems much too kind of rigid and confining, and instead we're in a world of pure, rich ideas, the cinema of pure imagination. Now, I do have one slight reservation about this film, and I think it's to do with the overall pacing of certain scenes. Basically, the first kind of hour or so is setting up key ideas and images, but a lot of it is just showing that our heroine, Miyabi, has this kind of sad and empty life, that she's living a kind of purgatorial shadow life without any kind of genuinely meaningful connections or sense of purpose. And what that means is, we get these kind of huge long takes that just go on for uncomfortably long time, with no kind of dialogue or just scenes of people sitting and staring in silence with very little in the way of music or characters actually communicating in a way that deliberately is conveying how mundane and meaningless the world that Miyabi inhabits is. Now, it does all ultimately have a point, but it can get kind of frustrating at times. There are just these long stretches of very deliberate emptiness between the really stunning scenes that you get with the Mothman, and those scenes convey nothing. You get the idea after a few minutes, but the fact that it always plays out those uncomfortable silences and clunky kind of mumbly exchanges does get a bit patience taxing after a while, and I think that's very much a trope of elevated horror films. You get this sense of having to kind of sit through stretches of emptiness just to get to the good stuff.
It's not boring at all. It's boring if you're stupid. See, if you're stupid, it's all boring because you don't get it. It's all in your head. And you're just like, I feel a bit left out.
Now, what I will say is, it's entirely possible that it's just that, as a Western viewer, my attention span is shot to shit. I'd like to think not, but I think a judicious pruning of maybe 20 odd minutes would have improved this film gigantically, because as it is, it kind of feels like watching a really great film that is being played at 0.75 speed, and I believe that the same film could be made and convey exactly what New Religion is conveying, that same emptiness, that same sparseness, more effectively if it didn't make such masochistic demands of its audience. And that's a real shame, because that's my only legitimate criticism of this film. It's the only thing that's stopping me from saying that I think New Religion is a must-see. It's not even that it feels like it's dragging things out, or that it's deliberately making us wait for answers to all the questions that we've got about what's going on, who is this guy, and why is he taking pictures, and what's happening to Miyabi. Because when you do get those particular moments with the Mothman, when you do learn more and are given more information, it all comes together into something that doesn't just suddenly make sense in that you're getting an answer to a mystery and all the pieces are fitting together, but instead it sort of guides you along towards a particular direction. Now, I know that sounds kind of vague, it's kind of hard to describe, because it's a film that sort of plays out like a mystery, you're sort of wondering what's going on, but it doesn't so much have a key reveal or a key twist. What it's got instead, at about the kind of hour mark, and again, no spoilers, is that there's the introduction of a key idea, a key concept for our character to come to terms with that completely changes the entire film. And it's an absolutely terrifying idea. It's a really awe-inspiringly existential concept that's relayed in such a unique kind of consciousness-altering way that you'll find you get shivers down your spine. It's a film that uses strange dreamlike sequences and a blurring of reality and dreams and identities to create the feeling of kind of coming unstuck, of drifting alone and empty in a sea of nothingness, and I promise it's a feeling that will stick with you once the film's finished. There's an absolutely suffocating sense of impending doom in the last kind of half hour or so, which is made even scarier by the fact that it's not the threat of something terrible going to happen that's scary, but that instead it's about Miyabi's acceptance of her ultimate fate. Now, I know it sounds cliched, but for me, New Religion is that film. Every year, there's only the tiniest handful of films, horror films, that ever, I think, really get under my skin and get to you on a kind of deeper level. The more horror films you watch, the harder it is sometimes to capture that sensation. And even though I do have some slight reservations about the pacing of certain scenes, New Religion is a film that I can genuinely say did give me that sense of existential angst. It does draw you into a world of strange, inexplicable metaphors and imagery, and surreal, reality-altering ideas. It's a film that questions what it means to be human, what it means to exist in a world of pain and suffering, having your sense of self eroded, and how there can be something beautiful and transcendental in doing the most terrible things imaginable.